fantastical, so unpredictable, here on the SNL Network.
Hey everybody, welcome on in to another episode of SNL Stories here on the Saturday Night Network. My name is John Schneider from the SNN. Very excited to be with you for what is a very special conversation today with former cast member Darrell Hammond. And I'm always very excited to get to have these conversations, really blessed to have these conversations with James P. Stevens Jr. So James, how are you?
I am great, John. I love SNL Stories and contributing with you and having those conversations, as you just mentioned. It's a good time.
For sure. We've had so many great ones this season, including most recently Denny Dillon. We spoke to Bobby Moynihan, Paul Schaefer. There's been a lot of really fun ones this season. So if you missed any of those, go back and check them out. But today we are talking to the current announcer of Saturday Night Live, obviously replaced the amazing, incredible Don Pardo a few years back, and then was a cast member himself for 14 years at the show. So James, any great memories of Darrell, and what does it mean to you to be able to talk to him today?
I'm beyond excited because, as you mentioned, he's sort of unmatched with other cast members in terms of his trajectory. Because even though he's no longer a cast member, he's still working at the show. I mean, SNL is an institution, right? And Darrell Hammond legacy is just there's no question it's unparalleled to anyone else. If there was a Mount Rushmore of Saturday Night Live, Darrell Hammond's face would be up there for sure.
100%. He's so unique in his abilities to what he brought to the show, one of the greatest impressionists in the history of the show. So I can't wait to ask him some questions about that. And of course, he spanned multiple generations of the show. It's very rare when you have a cast member that's around for that long that they get to, participate in the show with so many different cast members. So I'm looking forward to hearing about some of his experiences, hopefully hearing a couple stories that we've never heard before. So, James, anything else you want to set up for the listeners today before we get to chat with Darrell?
Well, I know how much you love baseball. He is definitely, Darrell, in this case, the MVP in terms of political sketches.
True.
And if this was an orchestra, he would be the concert master, in my opinion, in terms of impressions for more than a decade. Let's be honest.
Yes, that is for sure. Well, I mean, this is going to be a great conversation. One of the great things that we do get to do here on the Saturday Night Network is let our patrons in on the fact that we are getting to speak to certain guests prior to announcing them publicly. And we got some of our patrons to send us some great questions for Darrell as well. So we'll ask him those. And if you would like to join our patron program, you can find it at patreon.com/the SNL Network. Well, without further ado, I am so excited to bring you our conversation with Darrell coming up right now. Yes, that is right. Welcome, everybody, on into the Saturday Night Network for another edition of SNL Stories, our interview podcast where we go back in time and talk to SNL alumni about their time at the show. And boy, do we have a wonderful guest with us today. First up, let me introduce the co-pilot for this interview. It is James Stevens. James, how you doing?
I am doing great, John. I could not be doing better because this is one of the most legendary and one of my favorite people ever to be having a conversation with. And I don't just mean John Schneider, who I do love.
Yeah, for sure. Love you too, James. But I totally agree. One of the all-time great SNL cast members, dominates all the stats. And that's a huge part of our podcast as we get to look at that as well. And one of the longest running, most renowned SNL cast members of all time. Give it up for Darrell Hammond. Darrell, how you doing?
Hey, how are you? That was quite the intro. Thanks, both of you. Happy to be here. Did either one of you write the jingle?
I did not. That was a hired jingle for the original podcast days that we had here.
I was hoping to learn and have someone sing it with me, but maybe another time.
100%, another time. But Darrell, thank you for joining us. How are you doing, by the way?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Hanging in.
Okay, cool. Well, we're going to get into some of your SNL history. We have some great questions today, and also thanks to all of our patrons who sent in questions for Darrell. We'll try and get to as many of those as possible today. But Darrell, would love to start with your SNL origin story. I mean, that's something we tend to ask former cast members here. You joined the show in season 21 with a ton of new cast members. It's really, new era vibes. Probably the last time before this season that we've had such a cast turnover. And I would love to know about, your story, about how you got onto the show. Had you previously auditioned, and what was that like?
I had auditioned a couple times for the show. One time I was working at a radio station in Orlando, and I sent a tape in, and there was a number you could call, and we called. It was the talent office, and they swore that they had the tape and were looking at it. So that was, had to be sufficient at the time. I didn't get cast then. Years later, I did a audition at Stand Up New York, and had what I thought was a pretty good set, and didn't get it then either. It was more of a timing thing. It was a couple of years later, Phil Hartman retired. I was kind of like him, or I was going to be in the genre that he had invented at SNL. And it was like that. Next thing you know, they're calling me into 30 Rock and doing 10-minute monologues for the band, and showing that I had a little nerve, because it was sure scary.
I'm sure. Absolutely. James?
Yeah. Did you tell us a little bit more about that maybe first experience? Do you remember meeting Lorne for the first time? Do I have this right? Did I read this or hear this someplace that you just had a root canal done prior to that
I'd had
audition?
I'd had a root canal done that week. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I met him briefly. We're in a studio. There was nobody else there except a floor director, directing the camera and so forth. One camera, empty place. That sort of hallowed hall where you'd seen the Stones and every other person you'd admired, and I don't know how I survived. I don't know how I made it through, but I did. I just started rolling off impressions.
For sure. I mean, between you auditioning for all three times and then finally getting it in season 21, did you feel like the cast that you joined and the time that you joined the show was the right fit for you? Because it's a really crazy time in SNL's history where they're talking about is the show going to make it? There's Mad TV is happening at the same time, so it must have felt like for all this new cast in season 21 that there was a lot of pressure on you guys to succeed at the show. How did you guys feel about it at the time, and did you feel like that was a great time for you to join the show?
Well, I can't speak for. I remember that was the time when people were putting out headlines like Saturday Night Dead. Yeah, that's when we entered, and I don't think anyone thought of it, in specific terms about, gee, here's why this is so hard. But now that you mention it, it was a hell of a lot of pressure, and I don't know how we dealt with it. I mean, eventually, before you go out there on camera, you're going to come to some sort of agreement with just what you can handle and what you can't handle. Me going out there the first time doing Ted Koppel, I couldn't handle the pressure. And I did a great Ted Koppel, but not a funny Ted Koppel. And, I learned my lesson like baptism by fire that night, because I was like, man, I ain't never doing that again. I ain't never going to let that thing scare me like that again. As much as it means to me, got to draw the line here, because that just sucked.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I'd love to know, obviously, you're best known for your impressions. And, as a viewer of the show, that's often can be like a little bit isolating in terms of your role on the show, which is like you got to learn the impression, go and put it out there. But as far as your camaraderie with some of your other castmates joining the show, with people like Will Ferrell and, Sherry O'Terry and some of the greats, did you have camaraderie with any of them, or start to feel like you want to write with some of your castmates? Or were you really just in that lane where you're focusing on yourself and your impressions?
I think that's, you could consider it that way, but that the people that you just mentioned and the other people that were hired that year were people that I felt good about and felt good being around, and could lead to the most important thing, breakthrough of your life, and that is some people sitting around on the ninth floor at 2 o'clock in the morning who like each other, and suddenly someone has an idea. I mean, it's controlled chaos. It's I never could figure out how the damn thing worked, to be honest with you. It's too complicated for me.
Well, you are the master impressionist, and it's I've enjoyed just just even over the years. I think a lot of our listeners have heard you obviously on the Third Person podcast that you've done with Chris, and you've broken down some of these impressions. You just mentioned Ted Koppel at first being really accurate, but maybe not that funny. I think it evolved into being pretty funny after what, but like Sean Connery, let's take that like in the Jeopardy thing, like that.
Listen, this is what I mean when I say it's not an impression, it's an SNL impression.
Yeah.
That's not a comedy club impression, and that's not a Vegas impression. This is in front of millions of people, and you haven't seen these words before. This is, I don't care how accurate you are, we're not doing magic tricks here. We need laughs, And that was my lesson that I had to learn, that I had to do SNL impressions from now on. And Dana Carvey helped me with that a lot. And so did other people. And I started stretching them and pulling them out of shape. Caricature, like the Hirschfeld drawings. That was my my guiding light for me.
No, I was just going to say, related to that, I think Sean Connery on the Jeopardy, for example, is one of those caricatures that is just like, I mean, he's saying things and acting things that are just so bizarre, right? I mean, that had to be so fun. And do you remember how that even came to be?
It's in the boiling pot of 4 o'clock in the morning. You've been all on Tuesday read-throughs in 8 hours. You got nothing. People start slapping things on paper that you hope are silly and smart, and so this one was so outlandish. I always felt like the audience has to understand your premise a little bit and basically agree with it. So there was no way for anyone to understand or agree with the idea that Sean Connery was stupid.
Right. Well, I'm curious, when you talk about the term SNL impressions, were you aware of these impressions, placed in history as you are doing them, right? Because you come in to play Clinton and you're coming off of, Phil doing Clinton in a previous era of the show. Is that something you think about when it comes to your time at the show, like what Phil did, what Dana did in previous eras of Saturday Night Live?
Yes, you do think about it. And suddenly you reach this point where you're like, dude, you need to not spend so much time on that. You got stuff to do,
Yeah.
The pressure is pretty intense, man.
Yeah. What was there a moment where it all sort of clicked for you, where you're like, okay, now I'm in the zone and I feel like I finally nailed how to do the game of creating these SNL style impressions?
I'm trying to think of an intelligent response to your question. Like there's some magic formula for dealing with more pressure than you or anyone you has ever thought or heard of. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I was scared a lot of the time. And I'd say about 50% of the time I left the show, thinking I had disgraced myself. I mean, it's pressure packed. There's movie stars and there's A-Rod and there's Kate Hudson and, there's Paul McCartney, and they're all hanging around, and the New York Times is watching, and the President of the United States is watching.
But when you have those folks, which I know is true, presidents and other people that you have done impressions of who have said, "Oh my gosh, I love the impression you do of me." That's got to feel good, right? I mean, and you find yourself in these crazy rooms and scenarios that you never would have dreamt, right?
I had someone from U.S. News and World Report tell me that I had lost the election for Al Gore, and I think he was just half joking, but to to get a phone call from the New York Times and being interviewed by the New York Times, who's telling you, hey, Al Gore is studying you and your performance you just gave, to figure out what not to do.
Good Lord.
Right. So let's figure out what not to do. Right. For our next debate. Yeah. Yeah, that's surreal. Look, I'm from Melbourne, Florida. The whole thing always felt a little outlandish and over the top to me to even be up there with those people. I never felt like I knew how to assimilate there. Because I was the field goal kicker.
Yeah. One of the things when I was watching you on the show, I always was curious about was, do you like politics yourself?
Not really.
So how does that go together? Like, you don't love politics, but you have to play these politicians, so you end up having to talk about things you don't care about.
Well, the job was to talk about not how they walk and talk, but what they say and how they say it, right? What they say when they walk and talk and how they say it. That's the gig, I came from a home where my father sometimes liked the Republicans and sometimes liked the Democrats, so that's kind of the way I looked at it. Good people on both sides kind of thing. He's a soldier. I didn't take it any deeper than that.
I think when you have that, no, this is very interesting. When you have this talent, you have this skill set, Darrell, I'm just curious, like when you're watching TV or you're around somebody, like is that always on for you? Is it hard to turn off that thing where you're just like picking
Really
up
isn't.
on the mannerisms?
It's not on all the time.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like when there's a task at hand. I mean, I went to an experimental class in elementary school and learned how to do math using colored rods, right?
Mm.
So I felt like, colors, when I wanted to negotiate with anything, intersect with anything, there would be a color involved. But, walking around in the mall, no. Sitting around at a football game, no.
Right. No, that's fair, and it's probably just a strange question, but a perfect answer. And so, related to that, the way that the show is produced, and sometimes very last minute, when they come to you and go, "Hey, we want you to play this," that's got to be amazing stress. Or can you talk through like the time where it's like the last minute ask, and you're like, "I don't know that I can get this."
Like all of them, I mean, I was sitting, I don't know what, it was sitting in a chair or a cabinet or something, in the hall just leading to 8H. And I was talking to one of the security guards who I was friends with, one of the security team. And Lauren walks by. And, this is what I mean when I say about hanging out on Friday night. I don't know why I'm hanging out. I'm just hanging out. You know what I mean? Just there talking, having coffee. And then Lauren walks by, stops, and goes, "Trump?" And I went, Sure. Let's get the tapes.
That's great.
I mean, that's another time when I say to you, that's an SNL impression. You learned it at under 18 hours. Okay? Not the same as doing an impression for 10 years and taking it up on stage in Vegas, for instance. As noble as that craft is. I mean, I love the art form. And I've seen some brilliant people over there. But this is an SNL impression. You only had 18 hours to learn it. And if it scores at all, that's how the writers are going to write from then on. You've got a blueprint for success. Let's go with it. So that's your impression now. When I did Al Gore in the first debate of 2000, I had been doing Al Gore in the Village all year long and not getting a single response because, he sort of wore the mantle of good guy, works hard, does well. Nobody wanted to make fun of this guy, and all we knew was he had a Southern baritone. I mean, vague imprints. After that outlandish first debate, Jim Downey, the genius writer who
Oh yeah,
made me God, more successful than I would have been. He came in and did a line reading for me. He was like, I know you've got the baritone Al Gore, and sounds great, but let's talk about just this debate. And we started the syrupy, overbearing school teacher. It hit.
Yeah.
And that's how I was supposed to play Gore after that. Although most of the time he didn't talk like that. It was just that one night. You know what I mean? Remember, remember the Sopranos, from the cast of the Sopranos approached me one day, like, I was talking today to Al Gore, he doesn't sound like you. I'm like, no, it's an SNL impression.
Right.
It's got parameters, yo.
Parameters, yo.
That's great. Did you have like another cast member of yours? I mean, obviously you were on the show for 14 years, so you sort of blended two different eras of the show. But did you have a running mate that you really loved to work off of when you were doing impressions in a sketch?
I did a lot of hanging around with Tracy Morgan, and later Keenan, and I felt like to be honest with you, I don't think I had any enemies over there. I felt like, but Tracy Morgan and I hit it off pretty quickly and had a lot of good times.
Do you consider yourself more part of that original, like the Will and Sherry and Norm and Tracy era, or more with the Seth and Fred and Jason, Kristen, Andy, Bill era?
Oh man, I don't think I could break it down in those terms. I don't mean to disappoint you.
No, it's okay. I'm curious.
No, I was happy to be on board.
I do want to ask you about a particular sketch that a lot of our listeners have brought up in the past, and it's a really impactful sketch for me, which is Goodnight Saigon. And that was in your final episode on the show as a cast member, where Will Ferrell's hosting, and then there's this like big musical number at the end of the show with all of these like random celebrities there and people singing. And I would love to know about like your memories of that moment. It's such like a unique unicorn of a sketch in the history of SNL.
Well, I mean, what's the basic premise? Anything can happen. Anything can happen. Why? This studio could fill up with 19 superstars in a matter of 2 minutes. That kind of thing can happen here. It was heightened comedy for me to be. It's hard to I don't know how. I think I heard someone say at the heart of SNL is a mystery, but I think whenever I would see things happen there that were so incredibly incredible, that it did seem mysterious to me,
Would you consider it your goodbye sketch, though?
I never thought of that like that. I didn't think it was ever going to be goodbye. I thought I would retire from the show full time, and that I would still do guest spots once in a while. So it was sort of murky.
Mm.
On that note, can you tell us a little bit about you're currently working for the show as the announcer. You have since I think 2014 when Don Pardo passed, and it's not lost on at least this group here that even before we lost Don, if he was sick or somewhere couldn't make it or whatever, you in more than one occasion I think filled in for him. Is that correct?
Yeah, a couple times.
And in some of those cases, people were not even the wiser, right?
I talked like Don Pardo to get through the sketch. And I thought that was, originally when they approached me about succeeding him, I thought, that was originally I thought that's what they had in mind, but it was actually to do Don Pardo that's not Don Pardo. Now, how do you do that?
Yeah.
So me and Higgins worked in the studio, and I'm sure some of the tapes got sent upstairs, but we basically created sort of a character in which the vowels themselves could be colored by the tones of Don Pardo. If you look at vowels and consonants on a tape, on a sonogram, you can isolate the consonants, and mine will be the same as yours. The soul of the person is in the vowels, right? So the idea was that maybe in a couple of the vowels, Don would still live, right? So featuring,
I love it.
right? And in the beginning, I did a few things like that, but it was the job is more of an homage to him than a replacement of him. Nobody wanted to replace him, and certainly not me.
I have some questions from our patrons that relate exactly to that, James. So I think I should run through some of those.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so this one comes in from our friend Curly Joe. Curly wants to know, Darrell, how does it feel as the announcer of the show to know that you saying a new cast member's name means so much to them?
Again, after a while, you've been at SNL for a while. You begin to things happen that trying to comprehend them is like trying to comprehend the moon. Really, how do you get it? How do you comprehend that? To see Paul McCartney standing there, to see A-Rod standing there, LeBron James just walked by. You tell me. It becomes one of the things you file away as, larger than life. It's a larger than life experience.
Yeah, definitely. We do have this question that came in from Rusty, and I think, James, you have a similar one, so I'll just pass it off to you after I read the Rusty question, which was, do you do your voiceovers live? Rusty says, Rusty loves your work and definitely feels like you're still keeping Don Pardo's legacy alive. So, James?
Darrell, there's a video online of you kind of in the booth and all that kind of stuff, but now with technology being what it is, you don't have to be there, right?
Yeah, I do it from LA mostly, but I'm going to New York next month. I'm going to do it some live.
Oh, cool.
It's a really enjoyable experience to be around that and have your job cut out for you, and not be the drama. Holy moly!
Well, I would imagine they love when you're in the room and you're there.
I love being there.
And do you participate at all in the warm up part of the thing? I know Don used to.
Right. I did that briefly for a while, and I was okay at it, and it was frustrating for me because I probably had I have to talk about her. Here I am. I have to talk like Geraldo Rivera in a couple of minutes. I hadn't done that before. There's only about umpteen jillion people watching, plus the President of the United States, plus Lorne Michaels and every other celebrity in the corner over there. No pressure, right? No pressure. After a while, you just go, you know what? This is just, it's a larger than life experience. I don't know how to put it any better than that. I wish I were better with words, but when I flew over the Grand Canyon one time, I can't put that into words. And it's just one of those weird, larger than life experiences, I think. Am I making any sense?
You are.
Absolutely,
It's great.
yeah.
It's great stuff. Yeah, for sure.
The thing that, blows me away the most is I wanted to be, I've always wanted to be an athlete. That was the first one that I wanted to be. And I know that I wanted it as much as Tom Brady. And I know, but those sketches with those athletes and those performances those guys give, you probably don't want to talk about that topic, right?
No, I do. I definitely do. I mean, did you watch the Travis Kelce episode this past week with him performing?
With who?
Travis Kelce, the NFL.
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it.
Okay. But yeah, sure. No, tell us, what were your thoughts on the athletes performing on SNL?
I love it that it occurred to me that these are people that are not familiar with the concept of failure. Not really. These are people who set lofty goals every couple of years and knock them off left and right and win. They win stuff, So it seemed natural for them to walk into a hostile and foreign environment and think, just basically have a basic sense of, I'll figure this out. Somehow figure out how to do this. And they did. You think about Peyton and Eli, you think about Derek Jeter. I mean, Tom Brady was masterful.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think about over the years how much I loved performing with him, you know, and it's me sitting there next to him going, I wanted to be a football player as much as you did.
Yeah.
I wanted it just as bad as But you start watching them and being around them a little bit, and you realize how we're not in the same universe physically as these people. Like there was a time when Elle Macpherson fell off a platform, got up, dusted herself off, walked away. That would have crushed me to death. I mean, these are superior, let's say physically. I mean, there was a scene where I was playing Dr. Phil and I had to punch Brady, right? So I'm having to take swings in the direction of the future Hall of Famer and greatest of all time. I'm swinging at his head. So the stunt guy comes out and goes, "It looks like you're trying to miss him. You swing at him like you're trying to hit him." He's like, "You all right with that, Tom? You swing at him like if this guy tries to hit you?" Tom's like, "Yeah, I guess. Sure, whatever." And so there we did the thing, and I literally swung at his head, and he was like, this giant form became like weightless, and I was like, "Yeah, there we go again." But he was such a nice guy to me, and um, recently I was thinking about I had my friend teach me Mandarin to say Tom Brady is greatest of all time because people have been reminding me about that episode, and I tell you, I love that. I love that. I love that sketch. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, do you want to hear Tom Brady is greatest of all time?
Of course, let's do it.
Yes.
他们不得连续永远的行.
Okay. Great.
I love it.
My teacher Bernice, who's an up and coming comic out here, I hope I said it right.
Yeah.
I hope I said it right. I probably said something like, "Let's go over to the boathouse," but
But you know what's crazy, Darrell, is that you're talking about how you felt about seeing Tom Brady in that room, but there's just so many people out there who are watching Saturday Night Live, seeing you do all these impressions, and now knowing that you're the announcer on the show that feel the same way about you. Like people who are coming up in the comedy field, maybe want to be a better impressionist or love hosting, and then knowing that you are the MC and announcer of Saturday Night Live, like people feel that way about you. So I think don't sell yourself short on that.
well, I'm gonna chalk that up. I'm gonna put that in my I don't understand it file. It's another one of those things where you're like, what the hell? Any damn thing can happen. Do you know what I mean? Like I was standing outside of De Niro's dressing room one time, and I was just talking to somebody. I didn't think, and we're near De Niro's dressing room. I was just standing there, and he comes out of his dressing room and comes up to me, doesn't say anything. Now, this is all done wordlessly, right? He comes up and he takes my hands. He's like, I was like, what the hell? Come on, man.
That's great. That's so good. Darrell, if you have a few more minutes, I just want to pepper with you with some questions from the patrons that we got. This one comes from Thomas, who says, have you chatted with James Austin Johnson about the impressions that he's doing now? So he's doing Biden and Trump on the show currently, or any other current cast members. They ever reach out to you?
No. And they're great at what they do, and why should they? You know? I don't know. I would be flattered to talk to anybody about any of that, but doing some really wonderful work.
Yeah, this one comes in from Lewis, who says, how do you feel about newer cast members doing impressions of celebrities or politicians that you used to be known for?
Well, I mean, you want to be this person at Saturday Night Live that can't be replaced or redone or repeated. But think of where you are. It's just not realistic to think like that. And so I never planned to be the only guy that did this guy or only guy who did that guy. I mean, it was uncomfortable for me to do, Regis Philbin after Dana had done it, but stuff like that happens. It's part of the gig.
Yeah, for sure. I have a question from both Demi and Ian. Wanted to know: is there an impression that you have done since you've been off the show that you wish you could have done on the show?
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, mostly, I've been doing, stand up. I wrote a book. I wrote a play. I did a documentary. It took 7 years to do. I don't know. Whatever was put in front of me, I tried to go after as best I could.
Yeah. What about one while you were on the show? Is there one that you really loved doing an impression of that you wish you could have gotten on more?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I didn't think of it like that. I was just like, next, what's the next thing? Because if you don't, you got to approach a week over there with the same vigor and intensity as if you were prepared to lose a digit or a thumb. You really got to scrape. You really got to work hard. The odds are against you. There's almost no sleep. It's hard,
Well, and you mentioned Phil Hartman earlier, and John asked a question where you sort of maybe downplayed in a very, very absolutely humble way, but it's like your legacy on the show is something that is on the top 10, top 5, whatever. I mean, you've not just been there for such a long period of time, and now as the show's announcer, there's a special kind of place for you, I think, in the archives. From the SNL perspective.
Well, I mean, that makes me feel really good because from the moment that I wanted to get on SNL and I devised a strategy that I got out of a book while I was working in a radio station in Vero Beach, Florida, between midnight and 6 a.m. for $3.35 an hour. So to hear anything like that or to be included in any of the lore or whatever, oh, hell yeah. That's what you dream about when you're sitting out there in the 1,000 in the country. And you can see cows. Oh, yeah, there's cows. There's cows right out that window. You know what I mean? And you're thinking, I want to be on SNL one day. How the hell am I going to do that? So I got this book. Sorry, I'm not original. I got this book by a guy named Edwards Deming about rebuilding Nagasaki after the war, and then talk about slow incremental improvements, right? And I was like, man, I'm going to try to make one improvement a week, no matter how small it was. One improvement per week. And at the end of the year, that'll be 52 improvements. Sounds like a lot of improvements. Now, I never made 52, but I bet I did 25. I mean, I really did consciously try to improve it stuff,
No, that is a good. What I like about when we do these SNL stories is there's this bit of philosophy, or just inside the human, that you share that would not normally have known.
How am I going to get from 27 to 39 when I'm already too old for the show?
Yeah.
How am I going to make that happen?
So, in reference to the legacy, this is what I wanted to ask. This is maybe just a strange, kind of silly, funny question, but I agree with however you said it. That I think all your cast member, your family of cast, all really leaned on you and supported you. Was there a bit of a Darrell inside joke though in some places where, I remember the last sketch of the one season where I think Jimmy was leaving and everybody's singing and doing their thing, and you're in your all black, which I know you're known for, and you're wearing your Yankees cap and you've got your cigarette.
It summed it up perfectly.
Yeah, it's Darrell.
Here's
Darrell Hammond.
Here's the field goal kicker. Call him whenever you want. He's going to come in. He's going to learn how to talk like Wolfman Jack for you. I mean, I didn't know how to write sketches. So certainly I wasn't involved in many of the other reindeer games, but I was happy to be there in my limited capacity.
For sure. And it was a very important aspect of the show, and so thrilled to get to talk to you about it. First of all, Darrell, thank you for your time today. It was awesome to get to hear some of your stories, and we appreciate it. Is there anything you would like to plug? Any shows you have coming up? I know you have an amazing book. If people haven't read that, they have to go check that out.
Yeah, it's called God If You're Not Up There. It's a New York Times bestseller. There's a movie about. I mean, if you ever want to read a pretty good book that's only half good, I only like half the book, but the other half's pretty darn good. So, thank you guys for having me on. I hope some of these stories helped or were interesting.
Absolutely. All right, James, that was our conversation with the legendary Darrell Hammond. How did you enjoy that?
It was amazing. It was fantastic to just get to visit with him and ask him some questions about his time at the show. Of course, he was very laid back, but very real, which I think is something that the listeners, I think, will really enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we ask for from our guests is we want them to be themselves, to get to know them. And I think that one of the really cool takeaways that I got from this interview was when he would describe himself and he used the sports analogy about how he's sort of like the place kicker or the field goal kicker, that he came in during the week for a specific part of the show. It's so uniquely different from all the other cast members that we get to speak to who are sort of like a regular part of the motions at Saturday Night Live. Like, they knew what they had in Darrell and they used it very well. So for me to get to hear that from him and out of his mouth was very cool.
Yeah, and just breaking down really the essence of an impression. As he talked about sort of the accuracy versus the humor, I thought was really interesting.
For sure. And I just want to also mention, I mean, a lot of you who know Darrell or read or watched Darrell in, interviews know that he has gone through a lot of personal struggles. We got to talk about some of that stuff like really, really briefly on the show. But this interview was really more about his time at Saturday Night Live to sort of celebrate, his appearances and the sketches and what it was like to work there. There are so many great resources, and Darrell himself is really proud of, what he's been through and, to be able to talk about all that. So many resources where you can read either his books or documentaries. And James, you want to just give a couple of those to the audience so people can check that out in case the listeners feel like we didn't address some of those things today?
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't know about his book, you should really check it out. It's God, If You're Not Up There, I'm Effed. It's a great book, and then the documentary is kind of almost a spinoff of the book. It's called Cracked Up, the Darrell Hammond story, and both of those really, aside from the comedic, persona and the fact that he's an actor, it's really a message of his tenacity and just it's really inspiring as just a way to take on the challenges that one is given in life. And he's Darrell Hammond is a remarkable individual.
Absolutely. One of the greats of all time at Saturday Night Live. And then, James, we were talking a little bit behind the scenes about some of the stats about the show. Was there any in particular that you were interested in?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. He is the highest ranked. He's the all-time most stated opening line live from New York at Saturday night with 75. Is that correct, John?
That is absolutely correct. And that was the first major statistic we were following here at the Saturday Night Network back in the SNL Stats days was, will Kate McKinnon catch him? And she may eventually when she comes back. But right now in March of 2023, Darrell is still the leader in the Live from New York category with 75. Kate is at 74, so one behind Darrell. And, that's a pretty big deal, obviously. And it makes sense given how many times he was doing a political impression in the cold open. But, besides that, I mean, he was 267 episodes as a cast member. He cameoed in 27 additional episodes. So he's just been basically in a little bit less than a third of the entire history of the show. That's crazy.
It's insane to think. Is the cameo appearance, you said 27, is that the highest ranked number of cameos, or is there somebody else that
you know what? I don't have that information offhand, but I would have to think so. I'm trying to think of anybody who might compare to something like that. I know Chevy came back a lot. That's an interesting one to probably take a look at. But 27 seems like probably the right amount, given that he would just pop in every now and then for an impression. And I think he spoke about that in the interview a little bit, which was, that he still would come back, after his time as a cast member, just to pop in every now and then. But also, 874 sketches we have him in. That's sixth all time, fifth among cast members. So if you don't count Steve Higgins and the voiceovers that he did, 110 impressions. That just like crushes everybody else. So, he's the greatest impressionist in the history of the show. There's some other great ones too, and we'll have to see at the end of their careers how they match up against Darrell. But for me, this was an absolute pleasure that we got to talk to him today, and I hope that he'll come back again and get to answer some more of your questions.
Absolutely. And John, I look forward to future episodes of SNL Stories because without teasing any specifics, I know we've got some other cast members, writers, crew members, all sorts of people associated with the show lined up for future episodes. And I can't wait, brother.
Absolutely. James is hard at work on getting some great guests for all of you to listen to, and I can't wait to share those interviews with you. So if you would like to never miss any of those interviews, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And of course, coming up next here is a super fan takeover next Monday night, where it is officially March Madness, and we are going to do a bracket of the greatest commercial parodies in the history of Saturday Night Live. So I'll be live with the superfans to go through all of those next Monday. And then we got the Quinta Brunson episode coming up very soon. And I'm also very excited to say here on this podcast that as of right now, I believe the potential strike has been averted with the film unit and Saturday Night Live and NBC. So it looks like we're going to get a regular show on April 1st, and very happy for all of our friends in the film unit that they can move on knowing that they're being properly taken care of. So congratulations to everybody over there for getting that together. All right, James, thank you so much for joining us today on this interview for James and myself, John Schneider from the Saturday Night Network. We will see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.